Hi, this is Ken Taylor, and welcome to A Local Affair, a weekly look into the local issues, events, and happenings around the Bangor area. If you miss any of this episode, you can download this or past episodes on our website, Spotify, TuneIn, or on our app. Joining us this week is Cara Achterberg, author and animal advocate, co-founder of whowillletthedogsOut.org, whose mission it is to raise awareness and resources for homeless dogs and the heroes who fight for them. More information on her work, books, and blogs can be found at cararights.com. Cara, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, happy to be here. So
you're an author, animal advocate, co-founder of Who Will Let the Dogs Out. What have you learned after traveling to many shelters and rescues?
I have learned that the problem is so fixable, and it's maddening that we haven't solved this crisis, that too many dogs are still dying, because it's very fixable.
So we're in Maine, and we get a lot of rescues.
Right.
We get a lot of, I'm in contact with several humane societies that are like, we're getting a shipment from South Carolina, Georgia, or whatever. Describe that whole thing, because it's really a foreign thing up here. We have, obviously, it's kitten season, but the transports are an entirely different industry, if you will.
Yeah, rescue transports are what is saving most of the dogs in the South right now. I've been to 75 shelters and rescues in 11 different states, all over the South. And again, I will hear when I go in and I talk to a director, and I'll say, where do all your animals go? Like, maybe they take in 1,000 dogs a year, big numbers. And they will say, well, we do some local adoptions, but without rescue, we couldn't survive. They would have to euthanize for space on a regular basis. So they count on rescues to come down, pull dogs, put them on transports, and take them to places like Maine. Maine gets a lot of them. New England gets a lot of dogs from the South, but it's a lifeline. Without those transports, so many more dogs would be dying right now.
Why? Why are so many dogs being euthanized?
A big question.
Yeah, it is. I see Twitter. There's a couple of sports people. There's a couple of people that I follow that they'll post, if they're not adopted by tomorrow, they're being euthanized. So why so many?
Well, there just are a lot of dogs. The numbers are astronomical for a number of reasons. A big piece of it is spay and neuter. There is not enough veterinary access. In the places where there is veterinary access, it's too expensive. You can't get appointments. Rescues and shelters are kind of last on the list because they expect a discounted rate. So that's a huge problem. It's also a cultural problem that a lot of people don't realize that they should do it. They don't think about it. It's just to them a natural part. They have yard dogs. There's not a lot of leash laws, if any. So they have dogs that live on chains or live outside. A yard dog is a pretty common concept in parts of the South, and that's a dog that just lives in your yard and has puppies every year, and those puppies might make it, or you might take them to the shelter. Shelters and dog pounds down there, they know the frequent flyers, the people who show up twice a year with a litter of puppies. So it's a totally different culture. So that's a really, really big piece of it, the number of dogs coming in. But it's also an attitude of a lot of communities that this is not the government's problem. This is not the county's problem. So county shelters, or like, for instance, in Tennessee and in Georgia, 2 places, and in West Virginia, there's really kind of a dog pound system in what you and I remember as dog pounds. Like, the dogs are held at the pound, and if their owners don't come and get them, then they're euthanized. And that's a model that is in some of the very rural places. There just is no money The county doesn't put any money into it. So it's a lot of cultural stuff. It's to me a lack of leadership, and then the spay and neuter piece is enormous. So, but that's really simplifying it. There's a million other smaller contributors.
So why areas like New England? Does it go back to the culture issue? Is it just a different area, or is it fewer dogs, or is it just a culture thing?
It's dog laws. New England has good dog laws. You have spay and neuter. You have dog licensing in a lot of places. You have county run and paid for shelters that don't adopt a dog out unless it's spayed or neutered, that require licensing, that, there's just so many more. Like you have leash laws. You rarely see a loose dog in New England. And like I lived in Pennsylvania before I moved to Virginia. And I remember once a dog was running loose, and I was on that social media, that next door, that little micro social media thing. And people were posting all over, there's a dog running loose on Parkton Road, and on about it. And finally somebody said, I picked it up. I got it. So if anybody needs it. And as it turns out, the dog belonged at the home where the people picked up the dog. But there was literally 80 comments worried about this one loose dog. You drive through parts of the South, there are dogs all over the place. And even if you don't see them, if you hang around long enough, you're going to notice. I was in Hayti, Missouri, and in this tiny little town, and just dogs. There were a bunch of dogs that lived behind the Royal Farms, and people would just throw chicken to them. And it's just different. It's totally different. And, that dog licensing brings an income so that you have paid, we had dog wardens in PA, and most of New England, I think they have them. But so it makes a big difference when the government, and I believe the county governments, have to step up, and it's a public service. You don't want these dogs running loose, and that needs to happen everywhere, not just in New England.
Yeah, I'm a member of a couple of like neighborhood watch groups in the air, and it's like at least the 7 days in a week, and there's probably at least once or twice a day somebody will post, oh, did you see the dog over on Spring Street and had no collar? So yeah, it is an absolute culture. It's just different. Do you think the problem of is going to be fixed in our lifetimes?
I do. I don't think it's going to happen super fast. The pandemic set us back a couple of years in terms of numbers, in terms of a lot of things. It is worse now than I've ever seen it. I got a call this morning for 18 dogs and puppies in Alabama that they are trying to get out. And they're just, everybody is overwhelmed right now because of the end of the not the end, but the aftermath of the worst of the pandemic has created that, just because there was no spay and neuter surgery for a good 6 months to 18 months in a lot of places. And now once veterinarians did open up, you had all these new adopters who were taking all the spots, and then rescues can't get them. And we still have a huge crisis of a shortage of veterinarians in the South, probably everywhere, but definitely in the South. And add that to the people who financially can't afford their dogs anymore and are dumping dogs right and left. Dogs that are being returned just because we adopted out how many more than normal during the pandemic, and then 10% of dogs that were adopted are returned. That's just the kind of the number that stays consistent in most places. So 10% of a massive number of adoptions is a lot of dogs coming back to the shelter. So you add all of those things together, and it's the perfect storm of too many dogs right now in the South. It's worse than it's ever been. So that's kind of set us back. But to answer your question, I believe it's fixable if people just get involved, everyone does something. And that's why we started Who Will Let the Dogs Out, because we feel like people aren't aware, and you can't change anything you don't know is a problem. So we work really hard to raise awareness in the general public, but we also work really hard to raise resources for the shelters themselves, to give them tools to help get themselves out of the situation that they're in.
Yeah, you mentioned Who Will Let the Dogs Out, and you're an author as well. What inspires you? What causes you to write? I mean, I always was I loved creative writing class in school, but what inspires you to write? Is it the animals? Is it the dogs? Or is it something, else?
I've always written, and I write because I feel like writing is powerful, that you can change the world with writing. So before I wrote about dogs, before the dogs hijacked my life, I wrote about organics back before there was an organic aisle in the grocery store. I wrote about how taking the toxic things out of your life in every kind of form, and your cleaning products and what you put in your mind from the internet, all of that. I wrote about organic life, and then I started fostering dogs after I lost my dog of 18 years, and then I discovered what was going on, and I didn't look back. So since then, the dogs have kind of taken over, and I write almost exclusively. I still write fiction. I still have a novel out. I had one out in 2021. But most of my writing is about the problem now, because when somebody emails me and says, I started fostering because I read your book, man, I feel like that justified the whole book, the whole thing, all those hours, just that. Or if somebody says, I read your book, 100 Dogs and Counting, and now I'm getting involved at my shelter, or now I'm starting a rescue. I've had a couple of rescues that have started, and 2 advocacy groups after reading that book. And that is just such incentive to keep writing about it. I know, and I hear from everybody, people don't read anymore, which was why we made a movie as part of Who Will Let the Dogs Out during the pandemic when we couldn't travel, because everyone says people don't read, but they do. And some people read. And if any of those people then read that and they get inspired and they try to bring some change, then it was worth every word and every edit.
Yeah, what advice would you give to a wannabe novelist? I mean, Maine, we're home to probably one of the biggest writers in the world. He literally lives, across town from me, but in Stephen King. But what advice would you give to the wannabe novelist?
Well, Stephen King's book on writing has got a ton of that really good advice. I love that book, and I use it when I'm teaching. It's just a matter of writing daily, which no one wants to hear that, but it's like a muscle that you have to exercise. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. Because it's really hard to take what you're thinking in your head or imagining or dreaming in your head and put it in writing that somebody else's head is going to read and understand and it come across clearly. I mean, that's really, really challenging. It's a lot of translating. So you have to get really good at putting what you're thinking into words that other people understand. And the only way to do that is to write and write and write and continue to write every day. And the other thing is you have to write uncensored. You have to write from your heart. You can't worry about who's going to read it or who's going to think this or that about me or whatever. You just have to pour it out. And when you write directly from your heart, people hear it. So that's what powerful writing is.
Only got a couple minutes left. Is there anything I missed? I know I don't know if there's are transports big at certain times of the year? I know there's like kitten season and puppy season and all that. And then we get into the weather issue as well. Is there anything I missed about any of the issues we've discussed?
Well, transports happen year round, and they have to keep happening year round. And they are a lifeline, but they're not the answer. Like, we can't rescue our way out of this problem. We have to figure out a way to cut off the flow in, because right now we're experiencing such a hard time because so many people, so many places are not having adoptions because so many people adopted during the pandemic. They got their dog and they're good, and so. Or they're not sure what's coming. Life feels pretty uncertain right now, and so they're afraid to commit to an animal. And so right now we're in this situation where there's not a lot of adoptions, and there's way too many dogs coming in. So there's so many. So fostering is, to me, the answer, and that's something people in Maine can certainly do. Fostering saves life. It not only saves the life of the dog that you've taken into your home, but it opens a spot for a dog in the shelter, so you're saving 2 lives at once. So I can't encourage it enough. Fostering is a phenomenal experience, and it can be really hard, but it is so incredibly rewarding. So yeah, fostering we didn't really talk about, but that's that's where it all started for me, and I still believe it. If you want to make a difference, foster a dog.
That's actually something I want, because I have a family member that had and I'll transition into another thing about breeds, but she owned several pit bulls, and she's a military brat, so she's all over the place. She finally realized maybe not having a dog is in full time is for me. So she's fostered, and she actually has a really good blind pit right now. Not genetic. It was abuse, but fostering really is sort of, the thing.
I love hearing that. I've always thought that the military families are perfect people to foster, because there's a shelter, an area in North Carolina, a shelter that really struggles because it's a huge military base area. And so when people are sent out, a lot of times if they can't find anywhere for their dog, it ends up at the shelter. And I've always thought, why don't they just foster? Because it's perfect. It's a perfect situation. You get to have a dog, and then when you have to deploy, then you don't have to have a dog, and you're not giving away a dog that's committed to you and then is heartbroken and 7 years old sitting in a shelter, probably going to get euthanized. So I think fostering is a perfect fit for military families.
And I mentioned breeds. Is there a specific breed, or is there a more prevalence of some breeds in these transports? I know with I've talked with humane societies, and there's a lot of black cats that just go unadopted. And is there a breed, or is there a common trait amongst dogs that are either euthanized or transported north?
Well, pit bulls die more than any other breed in the shelter by far. I would say 60%, I think, is the number of dogs being euthanized in the shelter are pit bulls. And pit bull is a terrible word because it's not really a breed. It's really a pit bull type. It's an assessment that a shelter director or an ACO or somebody makes based on the appearance of a dog. And it might have 0 American Pit Bull Terrier in it, but it might have Rottweiler or Bulldog or Staffordshire Terrier. Who knows? But we've labeled them this and then vilified them. And so because of that, that's the dogs that die in the shelter the most. Those are the dogs everybody is looking to find transport for, to find rescues that will take them. By and large, and I love them. I think they're the most amazing breed. They're so smart, but they are high energy. They're a terrier breed. And terriers need a job, and they need exercise, and they need to be engaged. They're smart. And so they're a challenging breed. They're a challenging breed to place. But as far as the dogs that they struggle the most with, obviously pit bulls, black dogs, black pit bulls, really hard to place. And large dogs, large male dogs are always challenging to find rescue or homes for. So yeah, the bigger they are, generally the harder. And the high energy, they have that high energy and large size, and that it takes a certain kind of person to handle a dog like that.
Cara, some really good information. Who will let the dogs out? Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
For more information on Cara Achterberg, visit her website at cararights.com, CARA rights.com, or whowill-let-the-dogs-out.org. Thanks for listening to this week's edition of A Local Affair, a weekly look into the local issues, events, and happenings around the Bangor area. If you missed any of this episode, you can download this or past episodes on our website, Spotify, TuneIn, or on our app. I'm Ken Taylor, inviting you to join us next week for A Local Affair.